What's going on, Wolves and Warriors? My name's Jay Stewart, and this is the Better Body Academy podcast, the #1 show for those looking to permanently overhaul their mind and body without dumb diets and unsustainable workout programs. We banish the fitness industry BS and replace it with science-backed strategies proven through countless client transformations. In the Better Body Academy, we help busy men and women around the world get unstuck and back into momentum so they start feeling strong and sexy again. Our mission is to transform 1 million lives, and you, my friend, could be next. And on that note, let's get straight into today's show. Today, what I want to talk about is a live basically about breaking or at least understanding fat loss plateaus a little bit better. So if you have questions, we can save them till the end and we'll go to all the questions at the end. So hold on to the questions to ask them at the end, and then I can go into some depths of detail. And what I want to give you here is a little bit on how to think about fat loss plateaus. And the reason I am doing this live is that I've seen a number of comments inside of the Better Body Academy and fielded a number of questions over the course of the last couple of weeks from guys that are kind of confused at why their progress has actually stalled. Okay. I've kind of seen an increase in this as well over the period of which our Australian clients have been in lockdown. So in itself, there could be some clues as to what's actually going on here to cause the plateau, and we'll pull this apart a little bit later. Okay. Now, let's talk about the frustration with fat loss plateaus. First, I just want to acknowledge it because the frustration that comes when your results either stop or slow is high. And I totally get why. We know that one of the keys to maintaining motivation is staying in momentum. And for this reason, one way to ensure that you're always motivated is to never get out of momentum. And so when you hit a plateau or a perceived plateau and you get out of momentum, it can feel a little bit like, what's the word? I guess like a kick in the nuts almost. And I want to be able to help you to understand why it's actually happening, if it's actually happening, and then what to do about it if and when it does happen. Okay. So let's talk about the early wins that happen during a transformation. Okay. So when someone starts new inside the academy, we often get some early wins, and this could be for a number of reasons. Number one is motivation is high. That's the most obvious reason. It's a shiny object. You come into the academy, motivation's high, and when motivation's high, what do? You try really hard, and this action is what drives the result. You're trying really hard, so it drives the result. It's pretty basic. So motivation is high. Number one, that's why we get the early wins. Number two, when you switch from eating a really refined, processed diet that's typical of someone in the Western world, you store a lot of carbohydrate. And with this, you also store a lot of water in your tissues because water gets stored with carbohydrate. You don't need to know the depths of the details, but it just basically means that when you're eating a highly refined diet, you'll typically have on board your body a fair amount of stored water as well in your cells. Okay. Now, the moment you move to our eating plan, which is what we call a whole food flexible eating way, typically what happens is you won't be having as many refined carbohydrates. And therefore, what happens is you don't store as many carbohydrates, which also means that in the early week or two, you lose a bit of fluid that's been stored with the carbohydrates that's been stored. So when people talk about fluid losses, what's actually happening is some of that water is actually leaving you, and it obviously appears on the scales as a decrease in our weight. Does that make sense? So that's number two. Lastly, if you've been inactive for a period of time and for whatever reason you got inspired and you're coming into the Better Body Academy, you've gone from kind of being inactive and eating shitty food for a long period of time, and all of a sudden you change that, and the body releases fat because you've gone from eating a high calorie meal arrangement and not burning many calories to all of a sudden you're in momentum. So you're just doing more than you were before, and you're eating less calories than you were before. So you're effectively creating a pretty large deficit. And what that basically means is that you are running out of fuel. So these are the three reasons: motivation, right? A change to your diet, and then the release of some water. That's why you get these really quick gains at the start. And what that does is really gets you quite pumped. So let me know if you're watching, if this happened to you, okay, at the start. And this is the reason that when you decide to start your transformation, your biggest goal or focus point should be to become consistent on a day-to-day basis. Okay. Now, what happens is 4 to 6 weeks, typically down the line, we sometimes see a bit of a weight loss stall. Okay. And given that there's 3 reasons that I can see of why we get those early wins, I think it's pretty easy to explain also why many of us that aren't heavily overweight and don't have a hell of a lot to lose typically plateau at around week 4 to 6. And here are the reasons. It's basically the opposite of what we said above. Number one, your motivation typically drops off. Okay. That's because it's no longer a shiny object, right? Often you come in and all your family was cheering for you. Yes, mom. Yes, dad, you're going to do it. And they stop cheering. And if you were reliant on the external motivation to keep you going and then they stop, your motivation drops as a product of that. Then obviously your consistency drops as well. This means your results start to slow. Inconsistency is the number one thing that brings people unstuck, okay? When we lose focus and get distracted. So that's the number one reason why we hit this plateau. Number two is that you're not going to continue losing that water weight. When you make the swap from the diet that you used to be on to our BBA, flexible eating way, you've basically switched the model and you've lost that initial water weight. And so you're not going to continue losing more and more water because it's gone. You'll maintain a certain level, but not that massive change to your diet. And number three, the final reason for an early weight loss stall is the body just begins to catch up a bit, okay? And it adapts to your newer, healthier way of life. You had the really easy fat loss wins at the start, and now it becomes a little more challenging. And so we're going to talk a bit more about this in a minute. Are you guys with me so far? Give me a silent head nod. Let me know if you're watching live, if you're with me so far. So we talked about effectively the reasons that we get the early wins and then the reasons that we get that sort of interim stall in our success. Now, before we go on, let's ask ourselves the question, are we really in a plateau? Now, before we go into this deeper, okay, I want to point out that most people think that they're in a plateau. They're actually not in a plateau, okay? If we're talking about a plateau, we're talking about a plateau typically on scale weight, okay? The weight on the scales. We might need to look at things a little bit closer than just scale weight to assess whether we're actually in a plateau or not. So when you step onto a set of scales, okay, when you step onto a set of scales, what actually happens? You're not measuring exclusively body fat, you're measuring your total body weight. So when you think about the different things that make up your total body weight, what are they going to be? Fat, muscle, your hydration level, whether you've done a poo, whether you've done a wee, whether you've got food sitting in your gut or not. I mean, a poo could weigh 1/4 kilo, okay, if it's a big one. So let's say, for example, let's say last week you lost 1/2 kilo of body fat. You lost 1/2 kilo of body fat. But when you weighed yourself, maybe you needed to go to the toilet, okay? When you weighed yourself and you'd just eaten, you could be legitimately heavier on the scales despite the fact that you'd actually lost fat. Does that make sense? This is why it's really important to kind of keep the variables consistent every time we weigh ourselves. You do it at the same time, you do it naked, you do it probably before you have a shower and after you go to the toilet and before you've eaten. That's what I would suggest. Let's go a little bit deeper. What happens if we look further into our waist circumference? Okay, because this is important. If your waist circumference, guys, is coming in, okay, if your waist circumference is getting smaller, but the scales are staying the same or even higher, you need to understand that you're losing fat. If the waist circumference is coming down, you're losing fat. You don't have a waist muscle. And so if your waist circumference is shrinking, okay, but the scales are not, doesn't matter. You're losing fat. You may be retaining some water, or maybe you're even starting to build some muscle. But if you're measuring your waist circumference consistently, you are losing fat. And finally, for the ladies, if you're on a week where you're menstruating or in the lead up to it, you can typically gain somewhere between 2 to 5 pounds of fluid retention due to the change in your hormones. This is not permanent, as you know, and it will go away, but that's the reason that you feel bloated, but it will show up on the scales. And so again, you might have lost a kilo of fat, but if you've retained a bunch of water because of where you are in your cycle, well, then you haven't seen it on the scales. This is why you got to look a little bit beyond the numbers. So let's talk about your photos and let's talk about your clothes. I want you to get in the habit of asking yourself, regardless of what the scale says, how are your clothes fitting and how is that changing? So your favorite shirt, your favorite pair of jeans, do they feel looser? It's probably because you're losing fat. Okay? If your belt buckle is coming in, gentlemen, you're losing fat. This also highlights that it's really important that you compare against your baseline photos from week 1. That's why inside the academy, we are so diligent in making sure that you take proper baseline photos. We massively overvalue the week-to-week changes, and we completely undervalue the long-term change. What we care about, guys, is the change since the start of our transformation, not from last week. It's far more important. Who cares if you lost 2 kilos in the last week? Wouldn't you prefer to be 10 to 20 kilos down over the course of a 6 to 8 month period and know that it's sustainable, that you can keep it off because you did it in a way that's sustainable? That's far more important. This is about playing, the short-term versus the long-term game, okay? We need to stop worrying about week to week and instead start comparing to baseline, because that's all that matters. When it comes to our photos, when it comes to our measurements, it's comparison against baseline that matters. The journey of fat loss, guys, is not linear. It's full of bumps, it's full of lumps, anything. And if you play the short-term game, you will lose motivation. We have to compare to baseline. Now, fueling this kind of short-term mindset, and I know this because I was on the phone to one of our clients this morning about their results so far, is you comparing yourself to people around you. One of my favorite quotes is, comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison is the thief of joy. And while you are looking around the people at you that you see that are doing well, despite the fact that they have different life circumstances, and you're trying to validate your results against them, you're actually losing sight of what's important. What actions are you taking? Not what is everyone else doing. What are you doing? Not what are you thinking about doing? What are you actually implementing? When you compare and you feel shitty as a result, you're so caught up in a reactive mindset that you stop thinking about what you're doing and what actually works. In other words, the plan. Successful people in life are the people that run their own race. Would you agree? They don't get distracted by the surrounding noise. I guarantee you guys, ladies and gentlemen of the academy, if you trust the process that's laid out in front of you, you will win over the long term. And some of our best clients, I think what actually happens is they're like, okay, what do we do next? Like, what do we do next? What do we do next? They're so conditioned to be looking for like, what's the next thing I have to do? And actually, it's really quite simple. The next thing you have to do is do the same as you did last week and just be consistent. Consistency is so underrated. It's the most powerful force. Just because there's a billion different options to choose from, that doesn't mean there's a billion different options that you should do. You just stick to the plan that we've laid out in front of you and you will win. So let's now talk about what an actual plateau is, because that's the first step to decide whether we are in an actual plateau or not. So let's say that our weight loss has stalled and our waist circumference stayed the same, maybe for 4 to 5 weeks. Then we probably need to genuinely look at things. So if our weight had stayed the same and our waist circumference has stayed the same for maybe 4 or 5 weeks in a row, we need to look at it. The signals are possibly a plateau in our progress. So we need to ask ourselves, can we explain honestly to ourselves why this is happening? So if we are in a genuine plateau over a 4 or 5 week period, and the plateau is being signaled by multiple things, waist circumference, no photos difference, okay, let's entertain that we might be in a plateau. In that circumstance, we need to ask ourselves first, can we explain why this is happening? There'll be one of two possibilities, and we'll talk about them in a minute, okay? But let's talk about how the possibility of plateau occurs, okay? Number one is a metabolic plateau. Your body has adapted to the increased daily activity that you're doing and the reduction in your overall calories. And what it's done is it's set a new maintenance level, okay? Essentially, your body has become more efficient because you're not carrying as much weight anymore. Does that make sense? It's become more efficient because it's not as hard to haul you around anymore. It's not under as much stress. It's now burning fewer calories to do the same job as it used to do before. And therefore, you don't need as many calories. So we might have to dial the calories down potentially. That's a metabolic plateau. However, the more common thing is that we are in a behavioral plateau. This is the far more likely one. Your progress has plateaued, but it can be explained by a change to your behavior. Okay? It's nothing to do with your metabolism adapting. Perhaps you literally and legitimately just hit your lowest weight on the scales in the last 10 years. And you're celebrating because you're proud. But as a consequence, maybe you reward yourself and you start refeeding a little bit. And that's not a bad thing, but that's just a fact. And you're plateauing off the back of the fact that you did really well. That's one possible thing. Or maybe you're saying you're tracking everything and you genuinely believe you are. You're not lying to your coach. You're not even actually intentionally lying to yourself. But maybe you're just forgetting your protein shakes. Maybe you're forgetting the sugar in your coffee. Maybe you're forgetting the beers because you're at the pub and you're not there on MyFitnessPal. Or maybe it's something more subtle. Maybe you're actually having a little emotional or stress-based couple of biscuits when you're feeling down because it's lockdown. Okay? It's not that you're intentionally lying. It's just that, forgot those things. Or maybe your exercise output has gone up. In other words, you're doing your home workouts, you're doing your dumbbell domination program, but your overall step count, because of lockdown, you're stuck inside, is actually less. So although it feels that you're dominating, yes, I just did a 40-minute workout in the backyard and I smashed it. But as a result of the fact that you smashed it, you were tired off the back of smashing it. You've got your kids at home draining your energy because you're doing homeschooling and you're stuck inside. So your overall step count goes down. You smashed it for the 40 minutes, but actually your overall activity for the day went down because usually you're on your feet, walking to the shops, doing this and that. But this time round, you're in lockdown and you're not. So actually what you're doing in real terms is less. Does this make sense? Let's look at a real life example. Okay. And it's great that that Nick came in because I'm actually going to talk about her now. So she messaged me this morning saying, my weight has stayed the same for 6 weeks. I hope you don't mind me sharing this, Nick. And of 4 of those 6 weeks, the snacks were creeping in. And so I've accounted for those in terms of no weight loss. And that's really good awareness. Like Nick is super intelligent girl. And there it is. I haven't had any fat loss for 6 weeks, but over 4 of those 6 weeks, I do identify great self-awareness that actually the snacks were creeping in, and they're probably creeping in because she was at home and she was bored and feeling a bit depressed about being in lockdown and then trying to cope with the stress of the kids and all that sort of stuff. Natural human responses, but the snacks creep in. And that puts us into a calorie surplus, okay? And that calorie surplus carries forward a little bit. And then Nick's looking at the last 2 weeks thinking, man, I worked really hard on my exercise. And it's kind of like, yep, and it's 2 weeks. And it's 2 weeks. And are those 2 weeks, is it consistent? Is the plateau consistent across all areas? Because everyone in Nick's life is noticing the non-scale victories. Okay, in her life, that wow, you look fantastic. Lots of non-scale victories. Okay, the key statement that she made, and I'm sure Nick won't mind me pulling this apart because it's for the benefit of everyone. Nick made the statement. Now listen up to this statement, guys. I know a calorie deficit is required for fat loss, and I'm 100% in a calorie deficit. Okay, I'm going to say that again. I know a calorie deficit is required for fat loss, and I'm 100% in a calorie deficit. But there's actually a contradiction in the statement. If you're 100% definitely in a calorie deficit, you will be losing weight. By the very nature of the word deficit, this means you have to lose fat. It's a perception that I've worked hard and deserve to be losing weight. That's agreed. But a deficit is factual and it shows up in our results. And I can see why it gets really frustrating at certain times when you feel like, you're putting in, but it's not showing up against your weekly results. So going back to our 2 possible explanations, most often a fat loss plateau is not actually a plateau, or it's explained by human error. Okay. When you start to talk to a client, okay, and you get kind of a feeling around what's going on, you understand that consistent means most days, Jace, not every day. And I'm not saying that you have to do it every day. I'm saying that, calorie deficits and fat movement happen when the two go together. And so often, as you get closer to your body goal, it just becomes a little bit harder. And it's not that the client is lying. It's not that the person is lying. It's just that it's a well-known fact that humans' ability to recall information is terrible. We just forget stuff. It's not that we're lying. We just forget stuff. This is why MyFitnessPal is for your understanding. That's why our coaches don't sit there and go through everyone's MyFitnessPal, because it's only as good as what you actually put down. It's only as reliable as you are consistent. And I know how hard it is to be consistent. Most people are very consistent Monday to Thursday. And then what they do is they eat, drink, and sit back all of their good work Friday to Sunday. It's human nature. It's not because they don't care. It's not because of something, critical of them. It's just human nature. We're really restrictive Monday to Thursday, and then we get to Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and we might have got into a 300 or 400 calorie deficit for 4 days in a row, but then all we need to do is unleash a little bit at the weekend, and we've gone back into thousands of calorie surplus. This is why we spend so much time in the academy trying to do stuff like this, where we're trying to teach you so that you better understand how it all works. Because ultimately, when you learn to kind of command your own destiny, that's when you feel in full control. Now, in the minority of cases, and it's more typical of clients that we've been working with for a longer period of time, their bodies are starting to adapt a little bit. They're becoming quite efficient. And we need to make changes in order to continue to progress. Okay. Most often, what we need to do is to create another calorie deficit through the combination of lowering calories slightly or increasing cardio slightly, or both. And that is usually enough to get the progress kick-started again, at least for a few more weeks, until our body, again, being an adaptation machine, adapts again. Okay. Remember that, guys, when we're moving towards finishing this live off, but the body's primary goal is to survive. Okay. It's to survive under all circumstances. And so the closer you get to what you'd consider to be an ideal body fat level, the harder it actually gets. All right. Often men particularly, and one of my clients, Terry, is knowing exactly what I said because we spoke about this yesterday. Often older guys chasing a six-pack will lose all of the fat in their face first and even start looking a little bit gaunt before the abs start actually coming through. And so one of the questions that often we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to lose all the fat in our face before it actually comes off our belly? It's an interesting question to ask, right? So the point of this live, guys, is, to get you thinking a little bit more. Now, at a certain point, all right, reducing calories and increasing cardio becomes a slippery slope. Okay, it becomes a slippery slope. It starts to produce diminishing returns. Okay, because the body is just so good at adapting. Okay, and some things that work for one person don't always work for another person. In these cases, we might go down the line of coming up with what we call a reverse diet. And this is where we start to increase calories again, which is kind of counterintuitive, but we do it in an attempt to push our metabolism or our metabolic rate back up again. So we start burning more calories, not just eating more food or eating more calories. Does that make sense? So it's a little bit too detailed to talk about in this live, and we cover it inside of our kind of more advanced programs. But it just, sometimes the body works in very strange ways. And if we can rule out all of the human error, sometimes it does come down to the fact that we need to try to almost shock the body into losing fat in a different way. Okay. So the point of this live, as I mentioned, is to kind of get you to think about your results. Okay. Maybe you think you're in a plateau. Let's kind of wind this up. You think you're in a plateau, but you're not actually looking at the right stuff. Okay. I want you to get looking at your waist circumference. I want you to compare your photos to baseline. I want you to put your favorite shirt on and feel how it feels. We've got to look at everything, not just the weight. Okay. And if you're in a plateau and you're lost as to why it actually is, usually, guys, the answer is simple. It's that you're not actually as consistent as you think when you really start to go deep on it. And this is not a criticism. This is just a long-held observation supported by many thousands of observational studies that show the exact same thing. Humans see what they want to see. So that's why tracking is so important over the course of the long term. In this circumstance where you're kind of just like, oh man, I'm frustrated, the major focus for you really should just be being as consistent as you possibly can, not having the ebbs and flows. That way, we know that if we are going to make changes, it's really because it's for the right reasons and under the right circumstances. Okay? One of our clients, Scotty's, mentioned, I know mine is self-sabotage on the weekend past few weeks. That's exactly right, Scotty. And so you might look at your results and go, oh man, this is frustrating. My weight hasn't done. And you've made tremendous progress. Okay. You've made tremendous progress. But then when you look and you actually start to kind of go, hang on, let me get down to it. Most often you can self-analyze, and you can, once you've been in this academy long enough, you'll understand that, oh, hang on. Yeah, you're right. I haven't been as consistent over a 4 or 5 week period. And that explains everything. Consistency is so underrated, and it's often labeled as boring, when the truth is it's often what separates the people that go from having a great transformation to an unbelievable one. And I'm not suggesting that, you should want an unbelievable one. Maybe you should want a great or a good transformation because you want to have more indulgence in your life. This is your transformation, not my transformation. And so the level of commitment that you want to apply will dictate the results that you get. And not just commitment over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Often the difference between someone that gets, lean in inverted commas and completely beat shredded looking incredible in a bikini is just the length of discipline, consistency over a longer period of time. It's not that they're doing anything special. It's that they can hold that position over the long term. So guys, hopefully this video helps to get you to understand a little bit more about what's going on. And if you've got any questions, let's chat about them. Wolves and Warriors, thank you so much for tuning in. If this podcast is hitting the mark for you and giving you the confidence to start your own personal journey, I want you to hit me up on Facebook or head over to my Instagram at jstewart_BetterBodyAcademy and DM me with the words Better Body Academy. I want to give you the tools to permanently overhaul your mind and body without dumb diets and unsustainable workout programs. Our mission is to achieve 1 million lives transformed. And you, my friend, could be next. So hit me up on Facebook or head over to my Instagram at jstewart_BetterBodyAcademy and DM me with the words Better Body Academy, and we can have a chat about whether we can help you with your transformation goals.